am live. Sorry. I am reading The Laird and the Lady. It is the story of Marylda and Rowan. She is an American heiress and he is a Scotsman living in the Highlands of Scotland in his castle Cloud. This is a story written by Joan Marshall Grant. She used to write books about her own far memories, 7 books in fact, but this one is her one novel, which was published 1949. She passed away in 1989, and she wrote amazing accounts of her previous lives, like Winged Pharaoh and Life as Carola, Egypt, Greece, Italy. Fascinating. Anyway, we are here now in the 3rd part of this book, chapter 10, Dust to Dust. Marylda's invitation caused Mr. Henderson certain heart-searchings with which he was only too familiar. His sister Enid had not been asked to dine at the castle, and to reduce her indignation he had said that Sir Rowan wished to consult him on business connected with the endowment fund. But later he had been told by Maggie, the maid at the manse, whose position on the village grapevine was rivaled only by Jean's at the post office, that both Sir Rowan and his grandmother were away from home. He had never been able to decide how far God permitted such trivial evasions of the truth as are made in the course of domestic harmony. Surely God, the all-seeing, knew how difficult it was for him to live at peace with Enid. Or was he impatient of any attempt to lighten the cross which he, in his bountiful goodness, had constructed for the purpose of testing his insignificant servant? Mr. Henderson would have been horrified had he been told that with a less arid upbringing he might have developed into something of a mystic instead of a minister. Yet there were times when he secretly longed for more nourishing food than the stony bread of his creed. It was then that he fought, alone in his study, to maintain the sturdy materialism of his Henderson forebears against the belief shed in childhood with his carefree grandmother. Enid had laid out his evening clothes in his bedroom, which was chill with a suffocating tidiness. He went up to change precisely at 7:15, so that within half an hour he would be ready to leave in time to reach the castle as the clock struck 8. He rebuked himself for a sense of pleasurable anticipation. It was uncharitable to rejoice that for once he would not only be free of Enid's company, but dine alone with the beautiful Lady Cardry. He slipped 3 Bizodol tablets into the pocket of his waistcoat, wondering whether he was being unduly optimistic to expect port wine in the absence of his host. However, he had noticed during the revels at New Year that the ladies of the house party had indulged both in wine and in stronger liquors, a custom which had not met with Enid's approval. He had tried to confound her without success by saying that the miracle of Canaan was an indication that on certain occasions wine was preferable to water in the sight of the Lord. Enid was waiting in the hall to make sure that he had put on his galoshes and wore his grey woolen muffler under his winter overcoat. To mollify her, he took his umbrella from the china stand, which it shared with the 3 golf clubs, long past their age of usefulness, but cherished as a relic of a strenuous youth. The bonfire had burned low when he entered the courtyard, and except for a casual thought that it was odd to have kindled it so close to the house, he observed it without interest. He greeted Agnes with geniality, for she had a record of 30 years of unbroken attendance at the kirk, and followed her to the library. Marylda had intended to wear a day dress, but at the last moment she had changed into black velvet and the Cardry pearls. He found the warmth of her welcome very flattering, and approved her choice of sherry. It was fortunate that Duncan had warned her he would prefer Bristol cream. He complimented her on the improvements she had made on the estate, and his admiration increased when she asked his advice as to what else should be done, and wrote down a list of names to remind her which of his flock were most in need of American food parcels. Evidently, the new Lady Cardry was not only generous, but efficient. If Enid made any more remarks against her, she would receive a sharp reminder that envy was one of the devil's advocates. Agnes announced dinner, to the relief of Marylda, who was finding it difficult to maintain a smooth flow of conversation. Mr. Henderson decided that Lady Cardry had connoisseurship to add to her other virtues. Sancerre with a sole, Lafitte 28 with a snipe, had not before been offered to him, for Georgina had considered a bottle of inferior claret and a single glass of port more than adequate when he and his sister were by courtesy invited twice a year. He beamed as he took a second helping of cheese soufflé. "Mrs. MacTaggart must also bless the day you came to Cloud," he said. "I hope Agnes will tell her that I was appreciative." "Don't bother to clear, Agnes," said Marylda. "Just leave the decanter on the table. I'm sure Mr. Henderson won't mind us being informal." He accepted grapes, the last of the muscats that were Anderson's special pride, and sniffed his port with reverence before putting the glass to his lips. He saw the candle flames reflected in her eyes as she leant towards him. "Mr. Henderson, will you forgive me if I ask your help on a matter which is terribly confidential?" "Dear lady, you have only to ask." He felt gallant as a boy. "You must have heard many odd confessions," she began. He raised a hand in protest. "We do not have confession, a Roman practice, shared, I regret to say, by some of the Anglicans," but he said this benignly, almost in jest. "I used the wrong word. What I mean is that you are used to hearing things which must remain secret. You won't think it impertinent of me to be disturbingly frank, to ask questions which you may consider none of my business?" "It is the duty of a minister to answer questions," he said with a confidence he did not feel. Surely she had not invited him to dinner in order to confound him with one of the problems, as is the nature of God, which had caused his own feelings of inadequacy. "Mr. Henderson, do you believe in ghosts?" He hesitated, torn between honesty and expediency. Honesty won. "If you ask me as a minister, I must say no. If you prefer my personal opinion, I say that there are more things in heaven and earth that man has dreamt of." He expected her to ask him whether he had any personal experience of supernatural, and was wondering whether he could be sufficiently indiscreet as to describe a certain summer morning when he had fled in terror down a path of the Cairngorms, fled from a thing, but not seen, which had reduced him to panic. It was a good story and evidential, for had not only 2 men been found dead at that place the next day, and had not Dr. Carvey, who performed the post-mortem, told him in private that they seemed to have died of fright? "Do you think a ghost might be someone who had not received Christian burial?" said Marylda. "And if you knew of such a ghost, would you be prepared to offer it the consolation of your church?" "I consider it of vital importance that the ritual of the church, by which I mean the established Church of Scotland, should not be withheld from anyone in need." Then a thought of alarming implications occurred to him. "You would not by any chance be asking me to enter the Cardry skull?" "Dear lady, I know that such a relic must strike you as barbarous, but I could not do such a thing without the expressed wishes of your husband, and I doubt if even that would be enough without the approval of the clan." "It's not the skull. I don't think its late owner minds it being kept here in the strong room, though personally I should have been annoyed when Thunder gave it those silver acorns and used it as a fruit dish. No, it's a much more recent corpse." Mr. Henderson blamed his third glass of port for what had clearly been a misapprehension. Lady Cairdry was asking his advice as to whether she might interfere in the affairs of some local family who were in doubt as to where their deceased should be interred. Was he to rescue, at the 11th hour, a strayed lamb who had died in hearsay? It would be necessary to obtain the permission of the next of kin, he said. There's only a niece, and she will be only too willing, but there are some rather odd aspects. You see, the funeral should have taken place much sooner. No wonder she had appeared somewhat agitated. He must hasten to put her mind at rest. These matters can be very distressing, but as we've had a long spell of cold weather, there need be no due anxiety. He coughed discreetly. William Campbell is a most competent undertaker. I think he will recommend a lead lining to the casket. The expense is considerable, but it will remove all danger of drip. He saw his hostess turn pale and rebuked himself for having mentioned such an unsavory detail to a woman of sensibility. I don't think there will be any drip, she said, trying to hide the emotion his suggestions had aroused. I'm almost sure she will be only a skeleton. He was now convinced that he had taken a glass too many. A skeleton, Lady Cairdry? My aunt's skeleton, she said desperately. It's under the floor of the old nursery. Sir Hector killed her by accident and thought it wiser not to mention it. Mr. Henderson furtively swallowed his bisodal tablets. Either he was drunk or else the poor lady was undoubtedly insane. He took counsel with himself and tended to rely on the second alternative. She must be humoured. If necessary, he would investigate so as to prove to her that this was no more than a temporary delusion. You say Sir Hector's first wife is under the floor somewhere in the castle? May I ask if you have seen the body? Not yet. It's in a secret room. They call it the Hide, and Robbie is going to open it for us. This was getting more serious. If Robbie was included in the delusional pattern, he would have to go warily. What a terrible tragedy that Sir Rowan's young and beautiful wife should be mad. But there was hope that the condition was curable. How right she had been to turn to him instead of Dr. Carvey, who was not qualified to minister to the soul. He took her hand, his eyes warm with compassion. Thank you so very much for your understanding, she said. How right Duncan was to say we could trust you. He knew you wouldn't forget that your grandmother was a Cairdry. Duncan Cairdry of Dalloch? He said incredulously. Surely that reliable young man could not be a party to this fantastic story. Or was it fantasy? Those steady eyes did not belong to a woman who was bereft of her reason. His heart rebuked his mind that still pleaded for neutrality. Can I be alone for a few minutes? He said quietly. I would like to ask God to guide us in what we may have to do. So I stop this here because it is a long chapter. I wish you all a lovely Saturday. It's the 22nd of June 24.